And welcome back to Patience is a Virtue, the YouTube channel devoted to finding value in future sports wagering. I'm your host, Andrew, and on today's episode, we're going to dive back into the WNBA and we're going to look at a specific prop market that is the exact uh, finals matchup. Okay, so we're going to be talking about who are going to be the two teams who are going to be playing for the WNBA finals. Now, you can find this bet at most of your major sports books. Sometimes it's taken down while games are in play, but we're recording this on Monday, August 4th, and there are no games today. So this is an excellent chance to dive into this market if you choose. Now, for those of you who don't know, there are 13 teams in the WNBA, and the top eight make the playoffs, regardless of conferences. So they just do 1 versus 8, 2, 7, 3, 6, 4, 5. So let's go ahead and take a look at the standings. And this is after about 28 games or so. So we have around 15 or 16 games left in the regular season. So currently, Minnesota is in first place. We have the New York Liberty. They're in second, 5.5 games behind. Atlanta is 6 games behind. Phoenix, 6.5. Indiana in 7 games behind. Seattle 8, Vegas 9, Golden State 9.5, Washington 10.5, and LA 11. So, and that gets us down to that's actually the top 9 teams. So I put in a couple teams who are still in contention for the final spot. We have 3 more teams who are left. They're probably not going to make it into the playoffs. So I just went ahead and left them out of this discussion. So again, we're going to be taking a look at an exact matchup. And the one that I like is, not surprisingly, Minnesota versus New York. Now, I like this for a couple reasons, but not just because they are the 2 best teams in the league, but because they are likely going to be on opposite sides of the bracket. And that's really one of the most important things that you need to consider when you're taking a look at this market. You need to sort of play out how you think the rest of the regular season is going to work out and what size of the bracket teams are going to be on. There is no reseeding in the WNBA playoffs. It's simply the seeds that advance on each in the bracket. They're going to move on to play the next team. So even if there's upsets, they're still going to play the next team that is scheduled to be in their line. And I really do think that Minnesota and New York are going to be on opposite sides. So again, all these teams have about 15 to 16 games left. And with a 5.5 game cushion, I think Minnesota is very likely to get the first position. Now, Nafisa Collier, their best player, she just got hurt with an ankle injury just a game or so back. And while we don't know how long she's going to be out, Minnesota is a strong enough team. I just don't think any of these teams are going to be able to overcome that deficit. 15 or 16 games, that is enough time to overcome it, but it'd be cutting it really short. I just don't think Minnesota is going to lose enough games to drop out of first place. So I definitely think that they're going to be on one side of the bracket. And then you got to be starting to look at who's going to be in the second spot or the third spot, right? So the race for the second seed, it's a little bit tighter. So again, we have New York in second, then Phoenix, Atlanta, and Indiana, and they're all within a game and a half of each other. So that really could flip-flop back and forth as to who is going to take second and who's going to take third, because of course those 2 teams will end up playing each other on that side of the bracket. Now, despite the fact that they are fairly close in the standings, I really don't think Indiana is a true contender for the number 2 or even the number 3 seed. They've just been too inconsistent throughout the year. So I'm going to put them to the side and not really consider them at this point. That really is just leaving New York, Phoenix, and Atlanta. Now, New York has had a lot of injuries this year. Jonquel Jones, she's her center, and she's been out for a large majority of the year. Now, she finally came back, and Brianna Stewart got hurt, and she's probably their best player. Some might argue with that, but I'd say that Stewie is probably their best player, and currently she is still out. Now, if New York is ever able to actually put it all together, I really do think that they're probably the best team in the league, and they probably should get the number 2 seed. I don't know if they're really going to push to get number 1 at this point, but I really do think New York has the best chance of getting the number 2 seed at this point. And I do think that I would favor them in a matchup if they were to play either Phoenix or Atlanta in the 2-3 spot in the semifinals. Now, if you like Atlanta, and Atlanta has been on a little bit of a heater recently, I would probably try to wait and see if they lose a game or 2 coming up, because that might get you a little bit of a better number in terms of this matchup. They've won 6 of their last 8 games, and I just don't see them continuing to do that. They can be a little bit of a hot and cold team. They are very good, and it's not that they can't win these games. I just don't see them keeping up that pace for the rest of the year. especially if it seems like they're going to be kind of locked into a position. So you might want to take a look at their schedule coming up. Their next game is at Chicago. They really ought to be able to win that game. And then after that, they play at Phoenix. So you might want to buy after the Phoenix game. I think that there's a good chance that Atlanta could go into the desert and they could end up losing that match. That might give you a little bit of a better shot. So if you like Atlanta, you might want to wait a couple games just to see if they have a little bit of a backslide. So you might be able to get a slightly better number. Now, on the other hand, if you like Phoenix, they actually have been sliding a little bit recently. So the time to buy for them might be now. Um, they have a couple games at home, which I think they should be able to win. And then again, if they beat Atlanta, that is going to keep shortening their odds. So if you really like Phoenix and you think they've got a good shot of making the finals, now would probably be a good time to buy, just looking at the schedule and possible results that could be coming up. So as I said earlier, projected mashups are one of the most important parts of looking at this market and buying into it. Um, Again, because Minnesota and New York are considered to be the two best teams, that doesn't mean that they can't get upset along the way. So if you think that, for example, Minnesota is going to be number one, and again, I do think Minnesota is pretty much going to be locked into the number one spot at this point, just don't see them dropping down, and you think maybe Phoenix is going to be the number 4 seed, bear in mind that Minnesota won the season series 3-1 against Phoenix. So that would be a favorable matchup for Minnesota. They'd probably like to see that. However, they're actually tied with Atlanta 1-1. They both have a win so far, and they have one more game to play, which I believe is at Atlanta. So Minnesota might end up losing the season series to Atlanta. They would definitely prefer to see them on the other side of the bracket with New York if possible. On the other hand, for New York, they are 1-2 against Phoenix, and they got one game left to play, and they're 2-1 against Atlanta with one game left to play. So definitely keep these sorts of keep these matchups in mind about who you think might be playing each other and on which side of the bracket they could be in. It's not just who you think is going to make the finals. You got to think about the path that's going to be that they're going to have to take to get there. And if you think there could be a favorable matchup one way or the other, you might want to look at an upset as opposed to favoring one of the top two teams. For me, I really do think that at least one of New York and Minnesota should be able to make the finals, probably both of them. But if you just have one of them with a ticket with one of them in there, you can definitely hedge in the semifinals if you think that is necessary. If you're really just not liking the matchup, you could even wait to see how a game or two plays out to decide how you want to end up hedging if you want to ultimately end up hedging on that side. Now, if you're really feeling confident about who you think is going to make the WNBA finals, there is another bet that you can bet. You can actually go with the specific outcome. So that would be not just the two teams who are playing, but what the result is going to be. So, for example, you could pick Minnesota to beat New York in the WNBA finals, or you could pick New York to beat Atlanta in the finals, right? Those bets also exist as well. You do get a better price because you are looking at a specific outcome. It's not just who's going to make it, but who is going to ultimately win those finals. And if you really do have a good idea about who you think is going to make it, if you're very confident that Minnesota is the best team and that they're going to be able to make the finals, you could even put a couple of them together. You could put Minnesota defeating New York and Minnesota defeating Phoenix, based on how you think the bracket might work out, or Minnesota defeating Atlanta, right? You could buy a couple of those tickets and you'd be in good position as long as Minnesota ultimately ends up winning this team, or New York, or whichever team that you want to pick. You can still get a profit despite the fact that you're holding multiple tickets and knowing that only one of them is going to win. Obviously, you got to worry about that team actually making the finals and then, of course, winning, but you would have a hedge opportunity also. If that team can make the finals, you being in a good position there. So there's a couple ways that you can play this market, but I really think it's very interesting because you get to kind of play out how you think the rest of the regular season is going to work and how you think those matchups might end up settling, and if something's going to be more favorable for one team or the other. And it's just a really interesting way to play it. And there are some opportunities to get out of it if you need to. If you need to, buy a couple different teams and a couple different combinations, you can certainly do that and still get your favorable profit, depending on what you're looking at. So it is a fun market. I think it's something you should definitely take a look at. And it's something that I know I'm definitely going to be playing for the rest of the WNBA season. And that's going to do it for this episode. Always remember to make sure that you gamble responsibly, never bet more than you can afford to lose, and remember, patience is a virtue.